Example 8. Verify the identity. Sine of x plus y over cosine of x minus y is equal to the cotangent of x plus the cotangent of y all over 1 plus the cotangent of x times the cotangent of y. All right, so we need to pick one side of this identity to start with, and then use the trigonometric identities that we already know, plus algebraic manipulation to arrive at the other side. Okay, so the question is, which side do I start with? Okay, they both look sort of complicated. I feel like maybe I can do something with this side because I can use the sum and difference formulas on these two pieces. So that's where I'm going to start and just see where it goes. Okay, so I'm starting with the sine of x plus y. Okay, and I'll color code this. In the bottom, we have cosine of x minus y. Okay, so let's go ahead and apply the formulas here, the sum and difference identities. If we go back to page 1 for the numerator, we need the sum formula for sine. So back on page 1, the sum formula for sine is going to be formula number 3. We need to replace the a and the b with x and y. So that is going to give us sine of x times the cosine of y plus the cosine of x times the sine of y. And then similarly, we can do this to the denominator. We just need to use the difference formula for cosine. So if we go back to page 1, that's going to be this formula. Okay, because we have the cosine of something minus something. Remember, the minus sign is going to be taken care of by this formula. Okay, so if we apply that here, this is going to be the cosine of x times the cosine of y plus the sine of x times the sine of y. Okay, so after applying the sum and difference identities, this is where we leave off. Again, our goal is to come up with this right side, cotangent of x plus the cotangent of y over 1 plus cotangent x cotangent y. Okay, so now if I try to pick up where, if I try to proceed here, the question becomes, where do I go? Okay, I don't really feel like I can do anything in the numerator. I've got a sine x and a cosine x and then a cosine y and a sine y. I really feel like there's nothing I can do. I can't factor anything out. I can't, it's already broken down into sine and cosine, so I'm stuck. Okay, so we're going to revise our plan. I'm going to scratch this out. I'm not getting anywhere. Okay, I'm going to go back now and I'm going to start with this side of the identity, okay, and try to achieve the left side. Okay, all right, so change of plans. Let's go back and start with cotangent of x plus the cotangent of y over 1 plus the cotangent of x times the cotangent of y. Okay, well, what can you do with this? Okay, there's no sum or difference identity to apply here, okay, and that's okay. We know that cotangent is the same thing as 1 over tangent. We also know that cotangent is cosine over sine. Okay, so you can do something with this. The question is, what do you do? Well, look at your goal. Okay, your goal is to have sines and cosines, not tangents. So, like I said, I know that cotangent is 1 over tangent. It's also cosine over sine. I'm going to choose this route because my goal has sines and cosines, not tangents. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, the cotangent of x is the same thing as the cosine of x over the sine of x. And then I'm adding the cotangent of y. This is going to be the cosine of y over the sine of y. Okay, that's the numerator. In the denominator, I'm going to have 1 plus the cotangent of x, that's cosine x, over the sine of x, times the cotangent of y, that's cosine y, over the sine of y. Okay, so yeah, we've got a complex fraction now. We've got a fraction We've got fractions within a fraction, okay? But we're getting somewhere, okay? We can work with this, okay? Let's try to combine the numerator into one fraction and do the same thing in the denominator, okay? So let's look at the numerator here. We're adding two fractions, so we need a common denominator, okay? If you don't know what that is, just multiply your denominators together, okay? So the common denominator here is going to be sine x times sine y, and then we need to get our numerator. So if we look here, if we look at this first term, cosine x over sine x, we already have the sine x in the denominator, so we would need to multiply the bottom by sine y to get what we want. So since we multiply this in the bottom, we have to do it to the top. So the top is going to be sine y times the cosine of x, okay? And then we will have our plus sign. This plus sign will match this one. Let's adjust the second fraction. We already have a sine y in the denominator, so we need to multiply by sine x to get the desired denominator. Since we multiply the bottom by sine x, we need to do it to the top. Okay, so the numerator is going to be cosine y times the sine of x, okay? And we have one fraction. Everything is combined into one fraction, okay? I'm going to do the same kind of thing to the denominator. Okay, so let me clean this up and then we'll do it. Okay, so in the denominator, okay, we have 1 plus the cosine of x over sine x times the cosine of y over sine y, okay? We are really adding two fractions because this is over 1, okay? So the same kind of thing. We need a common denominator, okay? Multiply your denominators together. 1 times sine x sine y, okay? Actually, make sure you realize that this denominator is really 1 over 1 plus you can multiply across the top and across the bottom. So this is really this. Make sure you realize that. Okay, so if I want a common denominator here, it's going to be 1 times sine x times sine y. So the common denominator here is going to be sine x sine y. Okay, so now we need to go and adjust the numerators here. Okay, so in this first piece, 1 over 1, it doesn't have the correct denominator, so I'm going to have to multiply by sine x sine y to get the denominator that I want. If I do it to the bottom, I have to do it to the top. So the numerator here is going to be sine x times the sine of y. And that makes sense. Okay, do little checks on yourself. Okay, you have sine x sine y divided by sine x sine y. Anything divided by itself is 1. 1 is what you started with. Okay, then we're going to have our plus sign in the middle. And then we need to adjust this term. Okay, in this other term, cosine x cosine y over sine x sine y, we already have the correct denominator, so we just need to write our numerator in. We don't have to change it. It's going to be cosine x cosine y. Okay, all right, so now that's great because the denominator has been combined into one fraction. Okay, so we are left with one fraction divided by another. Okay, so we can just divide the fractions. Okay, how do you divide fractions? Okay, well, we're going to leave the top one alone. So let me just rewrite it. It's a lot. So leave the top one alone, and then we're going to change the division to multiplication, and we're going to flip the bottom fraction, and this is what we're going to end up with. All right, so this is looking much better. Okay, notice that in the top we have a sine x sine y. It's going to cancel with the same thing in the bottom. Okay, so now to multiply our fractions, we multiply across the top and across the bottom. In the top, we are left with sine y cosine x plus cosine y sine times the sine of x. And in the bottom, we are left with sine x times the sine of y plus the cosine of x times the cosine of y. Okay? All right. If you notice, these are just the right-hand sides of our sum and difference identities. Okay? If we look at the numerator, we've got sine times cosine plus cosine times sine. Okay? If we go back and match this up, okay, this is nothing more than sine times cosine plus cosine times sine. This is the sum formula for sine. Okay, so this is going to turn into the sine of y plus x. Okay, because remember, if I write this down, if I have sine of a plus b, okay, I'm just writing the generic formula here. It is sine a cosine b plus cosine a sine b. Okay, so at this point, if you match this up to the numerator, the a value here is going to be y, okay, and the b value is going to be x. Okay, so we're getting there. Okay, in the bottom, okay, we have sine plus cosine cosine. So if you go back to page 1 and you try to match this up to one of these formulas, okay, you don't really see sine plus cosine cosine. However, remember that when you add, you can add in either order. Okay, the order doesn't matter for addition. So what I'm going to do is just reorder the bottom. Okay, if I come back to this step up here, okay, I'm going to write, because I'm adding, I can do it in either order. I'm going to put the cosines first. Okay, this is the same thing as cosine x, cosine y, plus sine x, sine y. Okay, and now I'm dealing with cosine, cosine, plus sine, sine. Okay, so if I go back to page 1, what do I see? I see a cosine, cosine, plus sine, sine. So this is matching up with the difference formula for cosine. All right, so if I go back to my page here, okay, the bottom is matching up to the cosine, the difference formula for cosine, which tells us that the cosine of a minus b is cosine of a, cosine of b, plus sine a, sine b. Okay, so here if you match it up, the a value is going to be x, the b value is going to be y. So this denominator is going to be the cosine of x minus y. Okay. All right, we're almost